First, we have Republican candidate Tony Wilt. Next is Democratic candidate Brent Finnegan. Tonight's panelists, those who are asking the questions, are news editors from The Breeze, Emma Corinta and Madison Haynes. Ryan Alessi is serving as our moderator and has been the coach for these students over the past few weeks.
We've got a lot to get to tonight, so let's get started with opening statements, where each candidate has up to 2 minutes for his statement. Mr. Finnegan won the coin toss backstage and elected to go second. So, Mr. Wilt, the floor is yours for 2 minutes.
Good evening. Thank you all for taking the time to be here. Thank you, Breeze, for hosting this forum. And I am Tony Wilt, and I represent you in the Virginia House of Delegates. I was born and raised right here in Rockingham County, along with my wife of 32 years. We went to school here. We raised our family here. Our family business of 35 years is headquartered right here in Harrisonburg. Virginia used to be in the top 3 to do business in. Now we're not even in the top 10. The Tax Foundation has ranked us 40th in favorability for our taxes on individuals and small business. We are very near the bottom in job growth. Since 2010, federal spending cuts have cost Virginia over $10 billion in revenue and 154,000 jobs. The Great Recession in 2008 was catastrophic to the state of Virginia. Yes, drastic measures had to be taken at the state level. Now, some will lambast the General Assembly for not continuing to spend as usual, but the only way to have done that would be to raise taxes. And friends, that's what I call kicking a person when they're down. Our economy has remained flat with very modest gains. Some will tout hundreds of thousands of new jobs, but the bottom line is this past session we had to go back to Richmond to close a $1.2 billion shortfall in our budget because revenues were down. We're clawing our way back, but we need more people working. Practically every business owner I talk to needs employees. My vision has been and will continue to be control government spending and intrusion, let citizens and business thrive. That will give us the funds we need to support education, transportation, public safety, and our safety net services.
Okay, Mr. Finnegan, 2 minutes.
Well, thank you all for being here. I'm Brent Finnegan. I grew up here on Broadway, and I went to Plains Elementary School. Actually went to church when I was a kid with Delegate Wilt here, although he wasn't a delegate at that time. And graduated from Broadway High School and went to Blue Ridge Community College. And for the past 14 years, I've been serving this community. I have been involved in various aspects. I've worked at WVPT, where I produce documentaries about important issues to our region, like immigration policy. And I've done a lot of volunteer work. I've taught citizenship classes to people who are working hard and who want to become Americans. And I've worked at I did hbergnews.com as a service to our community for 5 years, a local news website. And I've also worked at the Institute for Innovation in Health and Human Services, where I work with educators and health professionals here at JMU to serve our community and to work solving issues like teen pregnancy prevention and also rural health workers and providing resources for them. I have been active in this community. I'm currently serving on Harrisonburg's Planning Commission as a planning commissioner here in Harrisonburg. And one of the things that the reason I'm running is because I've seen firsthand what it is to struggle to make it and to pay rent every month. I was laid off during the recession from WVPT, and it's one of the things that I did to help pay the bills. I drove a cab. And as I was driving a cab, I met a lot of folks that were struggling to make ends meet, and that's why I got involved in politics. So I think we need better opportunities for people to succeed in Virginia, and we need more jobs with better wages. We need 21st century infrastructure, and we need political options beyond the same talking points that we've been going back and forth on for the last my entire lifetime. Why am I the best candidate for JMU students? I believe that we need better opportunities for people to succeed in Virginia, as I was saying, and one of the things that has kept going up is college tuition, and that's one of the reasons why I think that we need more state support for state universities. We need to make sure that all of the folks graduating have jobs that they are making a living wage. Right now, the minimum wage in Virginia is $7.25. I don't know anyone that can survive on $7.25 an hour. West Virginia has a higher minimum wage than we have, and so really providing options and investing in 21st century infrastructure so there are jobs for people when they get out of the university setting. And I'm a member of a local workspace called The Hub, and I'd like to see more of that kind of innovation for small businesses and helping to create innovation in Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Finnegan. Mr. Wilt, same question for you.
Yeah, I've been proud in the Virginia General Assembly to be a part of that clawback that we've done as far as spending for higher education. We've been able to put back $140 million of new money. That's in addition to what we've been funding. Because that Great Recession that Mr. Finnegan referred to, that took a big toll. And there were severe cuts that were across the board. And so I'm glad that I've been able to be there to help restore that. We've been able to set aside $1.5 billion for financial aid for your students. And also, my heart is to be able to see you get a job. I know every student that's in this room, you're here for a reason, hopefully to get that great education, and you're counting on a good job. If you choose to stay in the state of Virginia, I want you to have opportunity to have a good job that you can support yourself, your family, and support the tax rolls in the state of Virginia.
So, Mr. Wilt, this is for you. You have proposed a bill that requires students to select if they would like their information public. What makes a measure like this necessary?
Well, during this election cycle, there was a group that FOIA'd you students, your private information to be used in the campaign. And while any number of pieces of information that are public are certainly available, I just found it distasteful that an entity would go to the trouble to FOIA that information to target college students. So the legislation that I'm proposing to carry will allow you students, you will sign a paper to give the university permission to give your information, and not that you have to go to the university and tell them not to give you your information. I think your privacy is just that it needs to be sacred. To give away your cell number, your address, that's dangerous ground to go in my opinion.
And Mr. Finnegan, mass texts were sent out from a group supporting your campaign. Do you regret how that turned out?
I don't regret wanting to get more people involved in the political process. I think it's important to understand what we're talking about here. The information that was FOIA'd, how many people here are students? Can you raise your hand? JMU students, okay, so we know there's some students in the crowd. The information that was FOIA'd is FOIA'd every semester by Jimmy John's, by local apartment complexes wanting to market things to you. And what we did is we used that information, publicly available information, to reach out to let people know that there's an election this year and to get involved. It's important to note that we sent that text to everyone, Democrats and Republicans alike. And this is really about getting more people involved in the political process. I think that there's too much at stake in this election this year, and we really need everyone that lives in the 26th district involved and engaged in this election. And furthermore, I would just say that this wasn't a problem until, this has been FOIA'd every semester, and it wasn't a problem until this year when we used it. And I would like to see automatic voter registration in Virginia, which would make this not an issue.
So this next question is from Mr. Finnegan on public universities funding. So per student, JMU gets less money from the general fund than any other public university in Virginia. JMU freshmen next year are facing paying $1,000 more per year. How do you think this will impact the way higher education is viewed by the general public?
I think what it's doing is it's the rungs on the ladder, on the socioeconomic ladder, they're getting further and further apart at the bottom of the ladder. there. So if your parents went to college, there's a good chance you're going to college. If your parents didn't go to college, there's a good chance you're not going. And I went to Blue Ridge Community College to try and save some money on my education, and I got a great education there. And I think we really need to be making sure that we're supporting the funding at General Assembly has been cut 8 of the last 10 years for higher ed, for public education, and we need to make sure that we're funding that, and that also we're doing everything we can to make sure that people who are struggling to make it and people from families that are less advantaged have the same advantages to go to college. At this point, I think per credit hour, when I went to Blue Ridge Community College, it was something like $80 per credit hour, and now it's more than double that. So we need to do everything we can to make that available.
You touched a little bit on low-income families. Mr. Wilt, how do you think that this tuition increase would impact the general student body as well as low-income families?
Well, obviously, it's going to have a drastic effect. Depends on the economic conditions of those families, and you did mention low income. But I'll repeat that we have all agencies took a severe hit back in the recession of '08, and so there were drastic. That's a fact because many people weren't working, and so therefore they weren't providing that revenue to the state. And tough decisions had to be made. But I'm proud to say that we're working our way back. We've gotten we set aside $1.5 billion in financial aid for the students that desire to go to college. And I'll say that I've worked on an issue last year working with Chev, numerous universities around the state, JMU being one, to help educate the students on exactly what their student loan is. You might be amazed to find out that some students take out student loans and they don't even think that they have to pay them back. So they don't know that they have to pay them back. And actually this year then we had the budget language that instructs Chev to develop methods to better educate our students to know what they're getting into before they take on the student debt.
And Mr. Wilt, a follow-up question. How would you, if at all, change the funding model to decrease the gap in student funding between JMU and other universities in the state?
Well, that's something we have to continue to keep an eye on. Fortunately for us, there are new. If the elections go the way that I hope they go, we'll have a new Speaker of the House, Delegate Kirk Cox, and Delegate Cox is an alumni of James Madison University, and so I'll look at him to. We've tried to take care of JMU. JMU, when we had budget restraints last year, JMU was faithful in holding down their costs, and so I would do everything I can to help secure additional funding for James Madison University.
Thank you.
Any rebuttal or any additional discussion?
Well, can I answer that follow-up question? I think we need to look into more of the programs that can provide those kinds of services that you're talking about, and really expand on the scholarship programs that we have. If you look at what New York's doing, if you look at Virginia, if you Google the 5 richest counties in the country, 3 of them are in Virginia. And Virginia is one of the wealthiest states in the richest country in the history of the planet. And I think we really need to make sure that we're providing for Virginians who are looking for that good quality education, the opportunities to succeed.
If you don't mind, just a little moderator's discretion here. I just want to make sure everybody's clear on kind of the differences here. Is, to both of you, the main issue, is it funding from the General Assembly that needs to be changed, or is it additional funding from to the universities, or is it additional funding for student aid that needs to be increased? Which one or both of those need to be addressed? Either one.
Well, I would say I think we need additional funding from General Assembly, and we can get that revenue. There are different ways to get that revenue, and one of the ways is legalization of marijuana. And if we do that, that is something that, if you look at Colorado, that is how they're funding a lot of their public school systems. And so that's something that I think that Virginia needs to look at. We're going to get left behind if we don't.
Yeah, both. I think we need to look at more student aid, but then also, we have to realize, ladies and gentlemen, that the funding comes from the tax revenues that come in from the citizens. We have to have people working. There's not a money tree in Richmond. It comes from the revenues. It comes from you all working and paying in your taxes. That's where we get the revenue. To me, that it all starts with a healthy economy and getting people to work, having good jobs and better paying jobs.
Okay. Next education question from Madison.
The next question is for Mr. Wilt on public schools K through 12. What responsibility does the state have regarding overcrowding in public schools and providing more money for public school construction?
Well, the funding comes from the state level. We obviously have a commitment there, and as far as the overcrowding, we don't get too far in the weeds with the localities and how they spend their money. There's formulas, and they're very intricate formulas that dictate the monies that go to the various school districts, and then the school district use that money as they see fit. But I'm proud to say that in the General Assembly, since 2008, we've put back over $1 billion back into K through 12 education. We've been able to, just this past session, we put $191 million of lottery funds back into education, into local education, no strings attached. We also presented a 2% teacher salary increase. Now, I recognize the fact that to you, 2% doesn't sound like, to a teacher, it doesn't sound like much, but to the state, it was a cost of $32 million. That's an investment that we made. And I also add that was teachers rate 4 out of the last 5 years. So we are working to reinstitute some of those funding that we lost back since the recession.
And Mr. Finnegan, same question to you.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. What responsibility does the state have regarding overcrowding in public schools and providing more money for public school construction?
Virginia is one of the only states in the country that does not provide any kind of funding or grant funding for the construction and upkeep of public schools. If you look at West Virginia, if you look at Maryland, nearby states, they all have some level of funding. It varies from state to state. But the funding, I think it's unconscionable that in the state of Virginia, the state reimburses local governments 50% for the cost of building a new jail and does not reimburse them any percentage for the cost of building new schools. And if you look at the school to prison pipeline, that's the school to prison pipeline right there. That's part of it. And so what we really need to do is, I think, on the one hand, we need to restore funding to pre-recession levels and make sure that the schools at least have that level of resources, but also, I think, create a new fund that can be used by schools like Folks Run Elementary School and Harrisonburg High School that are overcrowded and need renovations.
Follow-up, could you speak on the rally that you attended yesterday on this same topic?
Yes, we had a rally on Court Square yesterday, and it was about most of it was about the funding for local schools and the new Harrisonburg High School. I've spoken with a lot of parents and students, and they're concerned about the overcrowding at the high school and concerned about some of the political forces at play pushing back against that. We've got to make sure that schools really are one of the only institutions in our society that help work towards equality. And before Virginia's public schools were created, half of Virginians couldn't read or write, and the people that couldn't read or write couldn't vote.
Mr. Wilt, do you have a rebuttal?
Well, the education is the great equalizer, and that's why I've been in support of school choice for parents, especially in the regions that are worst hit. Virginia has some of the best schools on average. We're one of the top states in the whole nation, okay? But that's an average. You've got great, just over-the-top schools in Fairfax, but you have abysmal schools in our inner cities. And those parents, you talk about unconscionable, it's unconscionable that those children are stuck in those inner cities with no choice but the status quo. The education establishment, it's all about the children until it actually becomes about the children, and they want more money to keep doing the same things that have kept those children in the situation they're in for decades. Those parents need school choice. They need virtual schools, if it's charter schools, whatever, that they deserve the right to be able to break out of those molds that they're in.
And Mr. Finnegan, would you like to give a rebuttal about school choice?
Yes, I would. School choice is something that does sound very good. I think when you talk about what is funding the schools, it's property taxes. And there was a case back in, I don't remember what year it was, but it was a Supreme Court case. And what it was about was the state versus local funding. And you can't have equality if, one example is the state of Hawaii treats the whole state essentially like one school district. And so all the schools get equal funding. And so you have poorer areas. And Mr. Wilt is correct that some places in the inner city do have poorer schools and they have less resources because they have lower property. And you can't talk about that without talking about the history of redlining in Virginia. So that's where a lot of that inequality comes from.
Mr. Wilt, this question is for you. Are there any circumstances in which you feel that abortion should be allowed?
My position has been on abortion. First, let me say that I'm unapologetically pro-life. I believe that every life is valuable, even the unborn. But abortion is the law of the land, so we'll abide by it. But as far as situations where it would be allowed, for me it would be when the mother's in danger of her life.
And Mr. Finnegan, are there any circumstances in which you feel that there should be restrictions on the access to abortion?
No, I don't. I believe that this has been a false choice that Americans have had to make. This is a debate that's been going since Roe v. Wade, and this is a debate that has happened. It's a false choice between women's rights and the dignity of women and protecting the sanctity of life, of unborn. And I don't think that we have to make it an either-or choice. This is a both-and. And I think that if you look at what policies actually reduce abortions in states like Colorado and Ohio, they have given universal access, not universal access, wider access to long-acting contraceptives. And I think that this debate has to move forward. We have to get a new perspective on this. And I think that's something that I bring, that it's not either or. This is something that I want to work to lower the rate of abortions in Virginia, and we can do that without taking access away and without taking the dignity and rights of women away.
Then hold your applause until the end. We got a lot to get through.
Mr. Wilt, do you have a rebuttal?
I'm not seeing where the rights of the women are being denied and the access is being taken away.
And Mr. Finnegan, anything else?
I do want to add that if you look at the policies that actually, I will very briefly say that I grew up in the same church. This is something that has affected members of the church that I went to, and we believed the same things, and there were a lot of tough choices that had to be made, and that's what began to really change my opinion on this issue. And it's an extremely tough choice for a lot of people with access to birth control and with access to social programs that can help them, like the Resource Mothers program at RMH. Those are the policies that I will focus on, and if elected, I will work with legislators that see the value of those programs to provide options for women who don't want to make the choice of abortion.
So, Mr. Finnegan, this one's for you first. With all of the uncertainty about the Affordable Care Act, why have you been pushing the General Assembly to accept Medicaid expansion, especially if federal dollars go away?
Well, the federal dollars won't go away. They may be reallocated. The federal dollars are there Congress just appropriated $700 million for military spending. So the federal dollars are there. The question is, will we take those federal dollars and use them to create jobs and provide health care for more Virginians? And the estimates that I've seen say that we could cover 300 to 400,000 Virginians, 4,600 here in the 26th district, and provide health care for them with Medicaid expansion. And this is also jobs. There could be between 15 and 30,000 healthcare jobs created. So you want to talk about jobs creation, we're putting ourselves at a disadvantage. We're putting working families and businesses at a disadvantage by not expanding. And there's only one party that's trying to take the ACA away, and that's not the party that I'm running as a candidate of.
And Mr. Wilt, And if the Affordable Care Act continues to remain the law of the land, at what point would you want Virginia to expand Medicaid?
Ladies and gentlemen, we're expanding Medicaid every year. So there's an average of 44,000 new enrollees that are coming on right now without expansion. Okay, and that's part of the concern that we have. The current system we have is taking up almost 22% of our state budget. We have to get that under control before we start expanding it to anyone else. We hear all the great accolades of all the benefits of Medicaid expansion, what it's going to do to economies and so forth. But the truth is, many states are being hard hit. Their budgets are busting because they've expanded Medicaid. The state of Massachusetts, Medicaid right now is taking up 40% of their state budget. They've gone back to the federal government wanting to take people off the Medicaid rolls. That's unconscionable. That's why we didn't do it. That was one of our positions in the General Assembly, is that we don't have the heart to bring somebody on and give them the program and then turn around and say, no, we're going to take it away from you because we can't afford it. And the promise about job creation, that's Arkansas. They promised 1,000 new jobs. Instead, they lost 819 hospital jobs, and they closed a hospital. Kentucky, the proponents there promised 5,000 new hospital jobs. After the first year, Kentucky lost 1,200 hospital jobs. It's a shell game, folks, and it doesn't. I can appreciate what the intent, but the numbers do not add up.
All right, I think Mr. Green, want to rebuttal?
He was talking about budgets being busted. Right now, budgets are being busted. Budgets of Virginia families that are trying to get health care, they have to rely on GoFundMe accounts, and that is unconscionable. We live in one of the wealthiest states in the richest country in the world, and we cannot continue to have GoFundMe tin cups to beg for money on the internet to ask people to chip in for cancer treatment. This is not acceptable. I don't accept it. And Medicaid expansion is not a magic solution, but it's the best option that we have right now to provide more health care to more people. And I want to work with community health centers to get the costs of health care down, because that's really what we need to focus on.
Mr. Wilt, in part because Virginia has not accepted Medicaid expansion, Virginia has the second lowest percentage of its budget come from federal dollars of any state in the country. Our federal tax dollars are helping other states. More than 3/4 of Virginia's revenue comes from Virginia. Other states are getting as much as 40%. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, again, we go back to the disaster in 2008, and then coming forward, we have that thing called sequestration. And part of our economy now, the direct hit we're taking from sequestration is the cut in government spending that we so rely on federal dollars. We still take in $2 for every one that we pay out on federal tax dollars. And so we cannot fall for that trap that lures us in and makes us be beholden to the federal government. And the very thing that we're talking about here, there's a prime example of what's happening at the federal level with health care, Medicaid, ACA. Those are the very, because it can disappear at any time. That's the very reason we haven't expanded Medicaid, because we can't become dependent on it and then have that rug yanked out from under us.
Just to clarify on that, how would expanding Medicaid be becoming more dependent on Medicaid if the state already uses it? I just want to.
Well, the promise is that the federal government's going to pay. When you expand Medicaid, they're going to pay 100% of the expansion. But then, after a period of time, they start rolling those federal dollars back, and then the state government. We're on the hook for that difference. And believe me, every $100 million is very important to the state budget. That's what we're going to have to find that money somewhere. Are we going to take it from our schools? We're going to take it from transportation. We're going to take it from public safety.
Any other comments on healthcare?
Yeah, I'd like, just as a follow-up to that, we need to understand that the federal money that we're talking about is already going to other states. And this is something that if North Carolina expands Medicaid, Virginia will be the only state in the Mid-Atlantic that doesn't have Medicaid expansion. That puts us at a disadvantage. And I really wanted to also say that the states, Arizona and Nevada, have both put circuit breaker clauses into their Medicaid expansion, which would kick in if the federal dollars were drawn back to a certain point. So there's a fail-safe there. Virginia could implement the same kind of expansion.
Yes, sir, Mr. Wilson.
If I have one more thought on healthcare, the time that I've been approached by individuals that want me to support Medicaid expansion, the question I've always posed back to them: tell me the core issue is the cost of healthcare. Okay, that's the core issue. And I've always offered that challenge and say, tell me how Medicaid expansion addresses that issue, and we'll talk. It's crickets, because it does not solve the cost of health care. What Medicaid expansion does, it takes money from one person and gives it to another. And that's the practical effect. Let me leave you with this thought. In the past 40 years, the administrators in the healthcare field, the numbers of them have grown by 3,000%. In that same time period, the number of doctors have grown 200%. In that same time period, healthcare spending has risen 2,300%. Now, out of each one of those dollars, the doctor's fee is 8 cents on the doctor. What's happening to that other 92 cents?
Mr. Wilt, this is for you. The legislature passed 4 bills related to opioids this year, and I'll explain 2 of them. One that legalizes syringe services programs, also known as needle exchange programs, in an effort to curb rising rates of hepatitis C and HIV in some parts of the state. Another one is one that initiates a plan of care and family assessment with social services in cases when a child has been exposed to substances in utero. These bills are geared more towards aiding triage efforts rather than breaking addictions. Do you believe these bills will be effective?
The opioid epidemic is ravishing the nation. I mean, it's at an all-time high. In Virginia, in 2014, more people died from opioid overdose than fatal car crashes.
The legislature passed 4 bills related to opioids this year, and I'll explain 2 of them. One that legalizes syringe services programs, also known as needle exchange programs, in an effort to curb rising rates of hepatitis C and HIV in some parts of the state. Another one is one that initiates a plan of care and family assessment with social services in cases when a child has been exposed to substances in utero. These bills are geared more towards aiding triage efforts rather than breaking addictions. Do you believe these bills will be effective?
The opioid epidemic is ravishing the nation. I mean, it's at an all-time high. In Virginia, in 2014, more people died from opioid overdose than fatal car crashes. And I thank you for acknowledging the efforts that we are taking in the Virginia General Assembly. And I'll also say we continue to work on that. It'll be something that I dare say we'll be working on every year, probably. How many of you remember bath salts? Yeah, remember that. I think it was for like 4 or 5 years. There was the next substance that was included in that process that would come before us, and we would address that legislatively to ban it or to control it. Then the next year was another. So the bad guys kept they just kept reinventing what they were using. And so with opioids, I mean, I think it's not constructed the same way, but it very well could be that over the next several years we'll have to continue to try to get ahead of it. It's so big that we are making efforts, but we can't pass laws but at one time during the year.
And Mr. Finnegan, what is your stance on this?
All right, when you said the needle program, was that HB 2317? Is that the one, the needle exchange program?
Yes.
Because I believe that Delegate Wilt voted against that bill. I wanted to make that distinction. That was a harm reduction bill, if that's the one you're talking about.
These are things that we need to make sure that we have resources. We need to stop treating drug addiction like a crime and start treating like what it is, which is a public health crisis. Everyone in this room has been affected, has had a friend or a family member affected somehow by addiction, and we all know someone who has been affected by this, and we need to treat these people with compassion and dignity. And I think the way to do that is, one of the ways to find funding for that is Medicaid expansion. So it's not just, one thing that it will help to solve. And it's not a magic bullet, but it is something that I think that we need to treat this as a public health issue. And when I've talked with local health workers, there aren't really many 28-day treatment programs in the Valley, and I was surprised to learn that. We have jails, but not 28-day treatment programs, and we really need that badly. So.
And if I could, the issue on needle exchange, to me, when you talk about prevention, I couldn't make the connection between, trying to prevent it and giving someone a needle to go shoot up again. That's didn't make sense to me.
As Madison said in the beginning of in the preface to that question, that was an effort to curb the rising rates of hepatitis C and HIV. Do you now see that? Would you agree with that now, or do you still think that it was the right move to vote against it?
Yeah, I still think it's the right move to vote against it.
What approach should the state take when it comes to enforcement and treatment?
Well, again, as you stated, I mean, we've taken numerous measures as far as trying to address the addiction. We've actually, this current budget, we put in $32 million for substance abuse treatment, and so that we're trying to help where we can.
Mr. Brandon?
I think we need to do everything that we can to make sure that we're reducing harm and stopping the spread of disease. That's why I support, making sure that people have access to birth control and, and protection, so that we're not spreading STIs. And also, why I would, if the roles were reversed and I was the incumbent, I would have voted for that harm reduction bill. This is something that we really need to make sure that we're providing resources for people that need the help, and again, stop treating these. A lot of the people that are getting addicted right now are elderly, and we may have an image in our head of what a drug addict looks like, but in a lot of cases it looks like our grandparents, and we need to make sure that we're approaching the issue as if our grandparents are the ones that are addicted.
Mr. Finnegan, just to be clear, what does that mean in terms of Madison's question about enforcement and treatment?
I think in terms of enforcement, we need to stop treating this like a crime. This isn't something, right now there are people who are addicted to alcohol. That's not a crime to be an alcoholic. It's sad, and those people need help. And so when it comes to enforcement, I think that we need to look at ways to mandate treatment instead of mandate them going to a drug court and then going into the prison system and have a felony on their record.
So this is on the legalization or decriminalization of marijuana. From January to September of this year alone, Colorado has made $182 million in total revenue from marijuana taxes, licenses, and fees. In light of this, what do you think is the best move for Virginia regarding the decriminalization or legalization of marijuana? Mr. Finnegan, that's for you.
There's a lot of talk about how are we going to pay for it, a lot of questions about how to pay for things. And one of the ways that we can help fund education is to do as Colorado has done and legalize. I think that the path to legalization is through decriminalization and medical marijuana. I have met a lot of people who are suffering from chronic conditions and who can be helped by using marijuana as a medicinal use. And when I look at, and I'm not just talking about Democrats, there are Republican activists as well, often who are suffering from Crohn's disease or a serious illness like that, and then they realize that they need access to this. And this is also an alternative that can be used for pain management to steer people away from opioid use. In Colorado, the teen use has dropped off. It's been regulated. They put the drug dealers out of business. and they've regulated it and they've taxed it, and that's how they've been able to raise that $182 million. And I think this is how we reduce harm and also help find funding for.
And Mr. Wilt, same question to you. In light of the revenue that Colorado has brought in, what is your stance on the decriminalization or legalization of marijuana?
Well, on the legalization issue, I think we have to remember that under federal law, it's still illegal. It's a controlled substance. And so I swore an oath to uphold the Constitution of the state of Virginia, the United States. And so until they change there, I think we need to be very careful on moving in the direction of legalization. But also, I think the first steps are to examine, the policies related to decriminalization and medical purposes. I supported legislation several years ago now, for the oils to be used for epilepsy. And so I'm in support of continuing to look at that. But, ladies and gentlemen, there has to be proof. I mean, you can't, we have to be careful that abuse doesn't enter in here and that we're giving out marijuana for somebody with just something, basically nothing wrong with them. So we have to be careful of that. And as far as Colorado, I've not seen it, but I understand there's a report that talks about the increase in DUI, driving under the influence of that. So increases there. I mean, so we have to, when we start looking at these things, as far as, especially on the legalization, there's a lot of questions. I'm not sitting here saying I'm 100% opposed to it. But there's a lot of societal questions and effects that, because it's been illegal, that there's just not an adequate amount of studies to prove that everything's okay across the board. Colorado, some of those states, they're a testing board. I don't mind sitting back and watching them to be able to see how they progress and see the pros and cons of what they do.
Okay, any rebuttal on that?
Yeah, I would like to say that when you look at teen use of marijuana, now there have been studies about teen use and that it does have a negative impact on the brain, developing brains of teens, and I do want to acknowledge that. But I also want to acknowledge that in Colorado, the teen use has dropped off because teens have access to what they can get illegally and what they have to buy in the stores that is government regulated and taxed. The teen use in Colorado dropped like 20%. So this is something that we really need to look at, and it's been studied over and over and over again, and the studies have shown conclusively that alcohol is far more damaging to the human body and to our communities than is marijuana.
Mr. Wilt, any final thoughts on that? Okay. All right, we're going to move on to the subject of guns, and Madison, that's your question.
Mr. Wilt, this is for you. Despite your strong support of the Second Amendment and support of the NRA, what further gun regulations would you support in Virginia aimed at preventing gun violence?
Well, as you stated, I am a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, and so I'm very, very cautious before I continue to step on the rights of gun owners. And I know gun violence is at the heart of a lot of people's minds and so forth, but I pose to you that, ladies and gentlemen, we don't have a gun problem, we have a societal problem. Back about a month ago, I spoke to a group of high school students, and I told them back in the day when I was in high school, we used to ride to school, me and a whole lot of other folks. We had our gun in the back, hanging on the gun rack in the back window of the pickup. Roll into school, go in and tell one of the teachers, hey, you want to see my shotgun my dad gave me? And sure. Teachers say, hey, you want to see the new deer rifle I bought? So things have changed. Guns haven't changed, but what's changed in our society that causes that to be a problem? And so we already have plenty of gun laws. We need to enforce the laws that we have.
Before I get to you, Mr. Finnegan, I have a follow-up question. Are there any types of weapons that people who aren't in law enforcement or military don't need?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about fully automatic weapons, those are already illegal unless you go through a very strict federal process to be able to get those automatic firearms. I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's darn near impossible. So other than that, I can't think of any firearms that couldn't be entrusted to the citizens.
Mr. Finnegan, as a supporter of stronger gun regulations, when do you believe those regulations go too far in restricting Virginia's Second Amendment rights?
When did they go too far? I would think if, back when Obama was supposed to take all of our guns, that would have been too far. I think that really there's the issue here is that we're having a conversation about safety. We can't have a conversation about guns without having a conversation about safety. This is about every other industry that you can imagine. You can't go to the store and buy aspirin that doesn't have a child safety feature on it. You can't buy a car without seatbelts or airbags. So every industry has been regulated. We found ways to keep them. We didn't outlaw aspirin. We didn't outlaw cars. We made them safer. And I think that's really what the gun laws need to focus on is safety. And so I would support policies such as better protection for domestic violence victims, and make sure that there's a process for disarming the aggressor in those restraining order situations, and also universal background checks with no gun show loophole. But just to talk about, really, this is, the NRA has really hijacked this debate. I know a lot of gun owners that the NRA does not speak for them. And those are the gun owners I'm interested in talking to. I'm not afraid of guns. I shoot guns. I don't have a problem with guns existing. I do have a problem with the gun laws that we have and a lobby that is acting in the best interests of gun manufacturers, not gun owners or our communities.
And Mr. Finnegan, what specific restrictions would you like to see on purchasing guns in Virginia?
Well, I would say the universal background checks with no gun show loophole, that would be a serious consideration and something that we really need to do in Virginia and make sure that there are reciprocity from other states, because guns can be purchased in other states that have different laws. So we need to work with the other states to make sure that our gun laws are fair and equitable, respect the Second Amendment, and also respect the safety of our communities.
Mr. Wilt, do you have a rebuttal?
Well, the fact is that the crimes and the atrocities you see being committed by individuals with firearms, they're not buying those firearms at gun shows. Okay, so that's a ruse that many want to play up and blame the problem. Ladies and gentlemen, we simply look to New York, the tragedy that happened a couple of days ago. If an individual is bent on doing harm, they can do it with any mode that they choose to. And so I do not feel that it's proper to continue to restrict the law, the predominant law-abiding citizens. I would dare say I would trust my opponent with a semi-automatic firearm. Okay, that's not the solution. We have a bigger problem than just the guns. It doesn't start with the guns.
So Virginia relies heavily on property and income taxes, which make up about 2/3 of state and local tax revenue, compared to 14% from the sales tax. What kind of tax changes would you like to see to ensure that Virginia's revenues best keep pace with the 21st economy? Mr. Finnegan, this is for you.
Well, I want to also say that there's a lot of issues with the tax rates in Virginia. A lot of pressure is put on local governments to raise funds. So there is that as well. We need to think about what's the state funding, like we talked earlier about schools, and what are local governments having to come up with the money for. And it's important to have a competitive tax rate in the state of Virginia, and it's important to make sure that the middle class and the working class is able to thrive and succeed. And right now, the middle class and the working class is actually paying more in a percentage of their income than is the upper class, 20%, top 20% of income earners in Virginia. So when it comes to, I would like to see more equality and more of a level playing field when it comes to making sure that those 3 counties that show up in the top 5 wealthiest counties in the country, that we're making sure that everyone is paying their fair share and making sure that we have enough funding for the common good in the state.
And Mr. Finnegan, just a follow-up, what specifically would you plan to do in order to make that come to fruition?
I think if you look at countries that have implemented taxes on luxuries, like luxury taxes, those are something that we could look at in the state of Virginia. But, and also what I talked about earlier is vice taxes. So, I mean, what Colorado's doing is a vice tax. And that's something that we can do without putting undue burden on working families in the Commonwealth.
And Mr. Wilt?
Could you run through the question? Thank you.
Absolutely. Virginia relies heavily on property and income taxes, which make up about 2/3 of state and local tax revenue compared to 14% from sales tax. What kind of tax changes would you like to see to ensure that Virginia's revenues best keep pace with the 21st century economy?
Well, I think, again, as we continue to work our way out of the recession, I mean, we're starting to see more people slowly get back to work and wages slowly increasing. But I still think we do need a tax plan. Ed Gillespie running for governor on the Republican ticket has a whole tax plan talking about a tax cut that will benefit all individuals and small businesses, a 10% cut. That'll go directly to them to help spur on the economy because what that does, instead of that $1 going to the government, that dollar is used to expand their business, to pay their help, and to buy more goods. That's the way that you grow the economy. And so, yeah, that as far as tax policy, I think my job has been since going into General Assembly to take every care to not expand taxes and not to put extra burdens on the citizens that already are suffering because they were unemployed or underemployed, and so it's important that we hold down taxes across the board.
Thank you. And Mr. Finnegan, do you have a rebuttal?
Well, I'll just say, I think what we're seeing happening what I see happening in Virginia, and what I'm concerned about is the middle class not having that same access to opportunity, and really an erosion of the middle class that we're seeing because of wages. And so really we need to start off with a more level playing field. So it's not really about redistribution of wealth, it's about equal distribution of wealth to begin with, and making sure that people are on equal footing to start with. And if you look at, those of you familiar with economics, the Lewis model of the dual economy, I see that happening a lot in Virginia, where we're splitting off into, you've got the economy for the working class and the economy for the top 10% of income earners. And they're not living in the same world, they're not living in the same economy, they don't go to the same school districts, and that's what I want to see change.
Okay, Madison, you got the next question?
Yes, so this is on business regulations. Mr. Wilt, this is for you. You've said one way the state could help businesses is by rolling back regulations. Can you give an example of a specific regulation in place that hurts local businesses?
I recently became chair of the Small Business Commission in the House of Delegates, and one of the things that I want to continue to focus on is regulation. And see, the tricky part here is regulations are almost like a death by 1,000 cuts. Okay, it's a little bit, it's like taxes too. A penny here, 2 cents, 2.5 cents. Next thing you know, you're working 4.5 months to pay the taxes. Okay, and regulations are often the same. I have a constituent that has a confectionery business. Okay, it's just him and a couple of employees. But VDACs, agency in the state, require an all-day training period for employees that are handling this. Now, never mind the fact that this business has never had an infraction in 15 years, but they, because of this regulation, they decided, based on food safety, that he had to go through this through training and his employees. Well, when you're a small business owner, you taking time out or sending one of your employees all day long, that's a huge hit. Maybe it doesn't affect as much to a big corporate entity. Definitely doesn't. But the small business, the one that we're counting on helping rebound our economy, that's a huge imposition. So that's an example of a regulation that I'm going to seriously take a look at.
And Mr. Finnegan, is there an example, if any, if that needs to be changed?
Well, just off the top of my head, I would say, when I'm out talking to folks at the Harrisonburg Farmers Market, one of the things that comes up is they sell a thing called meow milk, which I think is a pretty funny name. And a lot of people, the idea is it's unpasteurized milk that you get from straight from the cow, and there's no way to legally sell that, and so a lot of people who don't have cats are buying this milk at the farmer's market. And I think that common sense agreements between the buyer and the seller, where it's understood what they're buying and what they're selling, I don't think that there needs to be regulations about, as long as there's protection in place so that people can, know what they're getting and know that it's not, in this case, pasteurized, how much, and that's milk. But I think there's lots of, that's just one example. There's lots of regulations that I think can be streamlined, and I think, I'm also a small business owner. I have an LLC, and I've had to, fill out paperwork. It is some work, but I think that there are, we need to make sure that businesses have opportunities to expand and to grow, and I would be willing to work with anyone in General Assembly from either party who wants to take some of those regulations, reform them, and make sure that the protections that were meant for them remain in place.
Mr. Wilt, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just a thought on the example that my opponent gave was on, it's raw milk. Okay, we all know what it's called. And, there's a reason for the pasteurizing process. And I'm not saying I'm against it, okay? Folks have come up with all kinds of creative ways to do it. There's cow sharing and you can go on. My concern through all that whole issue is the public safety. If you're an individual and you're selling milk to another individual that's completely unpasteurized, untreated, okay, now I get why folks would want that, but are you prepared for the consequences when that family gets tainted milk and somebody has, it almost kills somebody? Milk's one of the most susceptible foods there is to food, airborne illnesses and contamination. So that's why it was especially targeted. But yeah, I'm not saying that I'm totally against it, but that particular area, we need to be careful. We've been looking at it for about probably 3 years with General Assembly.
I was going to say, we do have to move on unless you have something real quick.
Well, very quickly, I would just say, if you look at the opioid crisis, a big part of that is the failure of the FDA to properly regulate that drug before it hit the market. And also, we now have the DEQ, which is the state regulatory agency that is not doing their due diligence to protect the water in the Shenandoah Valley.
All right, we'll get to environmental in a little bit, but Emma, I believe you have the next question on the minimum wage.
Yes, so Mr. Finnegan, this is for you. As you brought up throughout your campaign and throughout tonight, West Virginia has a higher minimum wage than Virginia does. What negative impacts would raising the minimum wage have on local businesses?
If you look at, I think there's a myth out there about how the minimum wage laws are implemented. There are lots of states that have implemented minimum wage laws, and the way that they're rolled out is companies with more employees, so say a Walmart, is made to create given a shorter runway because they have more resources. And then the small businesses, people that are independent contractors or have 50 employees, they have a longer runway, maybe 10 years to get up to that number. So what happens is you have money circulating in the local economy that helps those businesses. And I've spoken with a lot of small business owners in the Shenandoah Valley who, they want people to have the money, people that work at Walmart to have the money to spend at their locally owned stores. And so that's one of the things that I really think that we need to think about, not just, it doesn't happen overnight. This is something that can help the economy and help working families over a longer period of time.
So just to clarify, you do not think that raising the minimum wage would hurt local businesses?
If you look at, if it's implemented the way it's been implemented in other states, no.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wilt, this is for you. West Virginia and 30 other states have a higher minimum wage. Should Virginia raise its minimum wage to compete?
No. Just to be quite simple about it, you want to raise wages, don't artificially do that because it does have adverse effects to businesses. Okay? If you want to raise wages, you create a healthy economy. You get people to work, you get create what I call a workers market, because then workers are able to see businesses compete for workers, and they keep upping their wages and upping their benefits. That's what moves people along, and the businesses are able to thrive, and the employees are able to thrive too. And then conversely, like when we had an economic downturn back, the Great Recession of 2008, I know I keep referring to that. That was a monumental situation that the state and the nation faced. A lot of businesses had to make tough decisions. They had to go. Our business, I had to make those tough decisions on cutting people back and cutting back some benefits and so forth. And so to falsely raise artificial wages or artificially raise wages it can be very detrimental. A company has, if the economy is stagnant, if they're not growing and vibrant, that theoretically could work as long as things continue to move upward. But you hit a little bit of snag, and the business, they're going to have to meet that. They're going to have to raise the cost of the products, and guess what? That higher cost of the product goes to you. You get to pay more of that when you buy that product. Or they're going to have to cut to meet the demands. They're going to have to cut jobs. They're going to have to cut benefits. Something to offset that extra burden that they have, or in the worst case scenario, the business is going to have to close. And all of these go. What you end up doing is hurting the very ones that you're trying to help. By falsely raising wages.
Okay, so clear differentiation on that issue. We're going to move on to immigration. Madison, your question.
Mr. Wilt, no Virginia cities have declared themselves sanctuary cities for illegal immigrants, but it has happened in other states. If a Virginia city were to declare themselves a sanctuary city, what would your response be as a delegate?
Well, I'm completely opposed to sanctuary cities because.
Please hold your car. We've got a ton to get through. Thank you.
I can't. I've again swore an oath to uphold, and I would say a large portion of the public officials around the nation have sworn an oath to uphold the law, and to directly go in the face of national, the federal laws, the immigration laws, and create sanctuary cities. That's you're creating an atmosphere of lawlessness. And we know what some of the sanctuary cities have become. They're hubs for illegal immigrant criminals, and gangs and so forth. That's the effect of sanctuary cities.
Mr. Finnegan, same question. How would you respond if Virginia declared themselves a sanctuary city?
I think we need to talk about what that even means. We're talking about something that is not well defined, sanctuary city. I currently go to a church in Harrisonburg, attend a church that is a sanctuary church. So is that illegal? We need to understand what does it mean to be a sanctuary city. I think Charlottesville declared themselves the capital of the resistance or something like that. The people trying to step around this because there is no legal definition of what a sanctuary city is. When it comes to local control, yes, I do want to see Dillon rule reform. Right now in Virginia, we have Dillon's rule. It's a strict interpretation, which means the local governments are always going to General Assembly to ask for permission. It's a game of mother may I. And I want to see that change. I want to see local governments able to do more things. And one of them is, to be able to create the city that they want to create. And right now, in Harrisonburg, we've just declared ourselves a welcoming city. It's not a sanctuary city. It's, again, we have to look at what these things mean. I think it's important to note that 63 police chiefs and sheriffs around the country formed a task force to look into local enforcement of federal immigration laws. And what they decided as a group was it makes communities less safe to go after and to do the job of federal immigration enforcement in their local communities. That's something that will make our community less safe. I want safe communities, and we don't get there by doing that work.
As a clarification question, do you agree or disagree on Ralph Northam's recent statement that he'd veto a bill allowing Virginia to have sanctuary cities?
I disagree with Ralph Northam on that, yes.
Okay.
And If I could, just one more thought. I mean, again, we're talking about the law. It's the local law enforcement holding an individual that's committed a criminal act, and then completely refusing to hold them at ICE's request. Okay, so that's the definition, the heart of the definition of a sanctuary city. San Francisco is a sanctuary city. Now, who's heard of Kate Steinle? Kate Steinle was walking with her dad on the pier, and a gentleman that had been deported 5 times, and I believe he was queued up to be deported for a 6th time because of crimes that he committed here in the United States. He was here illegally. He murdered Kate Steinle. And the last thing she said, dying in her father's arms, was, "Help me, Dad."
Okay, all right, we're going to go to a question about Confederate monuments next. And so, Emma, that's yours.
All right, Mr. Finnegan, this is for you. Do you support or oppose removal of Confederate monuments and renaming of buildings named after Confederate soldiers and officers on state property, including public university campuses like James Madison University?
This is a really big and broad topic, and people feel very strongly about it. This is something that I've heard a lot as I've been out on the doors talking with folks in the district. We can't really have a conversation about monuments. This isn't about monuments. We're not talking about Michelangelo's David. It's not the artwork that we're talking about. We're talking about monuments that were put up in various places around the state for different purposes. Some of them were put up as markers for battles that took place. Some of them were put up to mark where someone was shot. And others were put up specifically to intimidate black residents of Virginia. And that's where we really need to look at the context of when they were put up. And so I think General Assembly's role in this is to really look at what the context was for each of these and to have honest conversations. There was a Confederate flag flying over the South Carolina State Capitol building, and this was something that it took their General Assembly a long, hard, very emotional, very difficult conversation, but the leaders stepped up and had that conversation, and we can't even really start talking about the monuments until we have an honest conversation about the history of race in Virginia.
So, just to clarify, you do think that some monuments should be removed?
I think there needs to be a case-by-case basis for each monument because they weren't all put up at the same time in the same context.
Okay, and Mr. Wilt?
To be clear, I do not support removing statues or monuments or renaming this institution, by the way, because that's a slippery slope. We've already seen that in UVA, folks. They're wanting to get rid of Thomas Jefferson's statue over there. I mean, that's where it eventually leads to. Last year, I co-patroned legislation. Governor McCall vetoed it, but it would make the existing law very clear that historical monuments can't be removed. And if I'm reelected, I will support that measure again. It's to put that effort into that, and even Governor McCall acknowledged that it was not a good idea to take the millions of dollars. We're sitting here talking about funding schools, and we haven't talked about transportation, but some of the core needs of the state is spending millions of dollars of taxpayers' money to remove these monuments. I'm against it.
And Mr. Finnegan, do you have a rebuttal?
I think this is a conversation. Yes, some things cost money. It costs money to rename the street in Harrisonburg to Martin Luther King. Things cost money to do them, and sometimes they are the right thing to do. And we need to consider not only the historical context, but really, what is this doing to our community? What is this doing to our state? We have to have leaders that are willing to step up and facilitate those conversations. We cannot sweep this under the rug.
Thank you.
All right, and we're going to go to environmental questions. So Emma, that's to you as well.
All right, so Mr. Finnegan, once again, this is you. A major pipeline has clear hurdles so it can be built across part of Virginia. What effects do you think it will have on the environment and the economy?
When we talk about the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, will be running through the county just south of here, which is upstream from us, because the water flows north through the Shenandoah Valley. We need to really think about what is behind that. A lot of the people that have been talking about why we need it is that we need it for cheap energy, that it's a bridge to clean fuel, all that kind of stuff, and that's rhetoric, because really this is about investors in Dominion stock that will get money, and everyone in this room, will pay for it. And we have got to find a way to protect our water, and I think that the way to do that is not to build pipelines, but to come up with, we know we're moving away from fossil fuels, and we need to accept that that is the 21st century infrastructure and embrace that. And Dominion Energy in particular needs to realize that they're an energy company, not a fossil fuel company, and we need to take the cap off of rooftop solar so that people that want to put rooftop solar on their house or on their business can sell it back to the grid. And those are the kinds of jobs that will continue to exist after the first installation. And the pipeline, I think, is bad for our economy, it's bad for business, and when you look at how much of the Shenandoah Valley relies on, tourism dollars, it's a huge industry here, and we're going to cut mountaintops off and ram that thing right through, and I'm against the Atlantic Coast Pipeline.
And Mr. Wilt, same question to you, but I'll repeat it. A major pipeline has cleared hurdles so it can be built across part of Virginia. What effects do you think it will have on the environment and the economy?
Well, you're correct in saying that it's a federal issue and it's cleared the hurdles. I think I heard just today that West Virginia signed off on their part, and so yeah, it's going to move forward. I certainly want to see the environment protected. We all drink the water and breathe the air, and I'm confident that DEQ will pass on proper recommendations to the State Water Control Board to protect our waterways. It will be done under the strictest of standards, and it will be done safely. And on pipelines, do you realize that already in Virginia we have over 2,000 miles of high-pressure pipeline, gas pipeline. We have over 20,000 miles of low-pressure gas line. Okay, so we already have that. So if we want to reach energy independence, yes, the old fossil fuels, coal's on the way out, and I'm all for renewables. But ladies and gentlemen, we can't just turn the switch today and go from fossils to renewables. Natural gas is that it's 10 times cleaner than the clean coal technology, and so it's a great stepping stone. Because ultimately, when we want to make these drastic changes in our energy resources and how these energy producers create energy, drastic changes, you know who suffers for that? It's the ratepayer, everybody in here that pays an electric bill, because it's going to be reflected in that. So on that front, it has to be a gradual change.
And your brother?
In terms of who's paying for this, we're all going to pay for it in two ways. We're going to pay for it. It's going to be reflected in our bills, not in the rates, but in those additional charges you see on your bill. We are going to be paying for it, everyone in this room. And we're also going to be paying for it further down the line, because one of the major components of natural gas is methane, and that's one of the most harmful greenhouse gases there is. And when this stuff leaks out, we're increasing the climate catastrophe that we're seeing. And really, when you look at the storms that we've recently had this past fall in the Caribbean, the air can hold 7% more water for every 1 degree Celsius the temperature rises. That's why we're seeing worse storms now. This isn't a myth. There is a connection, and we have got to transition to 100% clean, renewable energy as soon as possible.
Mr. Wilt, word on that. I'm all about renewables, but it has to be done in a reasonable pace that we don't destroy the livelihoods of our citizens, especially those the poor and the most vulnerable. I mean, they have to be able to afford their energy. Okay, so it has to be a reasonable progression. That's all I'm at. I love the idea one day it would all be 100% renewable. But also was mentioned here earlier about the grid. Okay, everybody wants to be able to generate your electricity and sell it back to the grid. ladies and gentlemen, we like it or not, the grid has been developed up to this point, and it takes a certain amount of usage and revenue to support that grid. If that falls off drastically, the grid goes away. And guess what? When on the next 2 or 3 cloudy days, and you're not able to generate, your solar panels aren't be able to generate electricity, you're calling on the grid. Okay, so we have that has to be measured. Again, please understand, I love the idea of one day of going to renewable, and we're working that way. Solar panels are more reasonably cost than they've ever been, without government subsidies. They're doing it on their own. That's exciting to me. And so it's going to continue to get better. We can't make the switch overnight.
Okay, we've got several audience questions, and one of the first ones has to do with environmental issues. What is something specific you would want to see the state do to improve water quality and the health of the Chesapeake Bay? Mr. Wilt.
Well, I'm not sure if you're aware or not, but in the Virginia General Assembly, I chair the Chesapeake Bay Subcommittee. That's a subcommittee under the Agriculture, Chesapeake Bay, and Natural Resources Full Committee. The story of the Chesapeake Bay is exciting. Who can guess, and I've thrown this out, so somebody's probably out there that's heard it before, maybe a dozen years ago, how many bushel of oysters were we harvesting in the Chesapeake Bay? Anybody want to wag a guess? For time's sake, I won't draw that out. 20,000 bushel. 2 years ago, over 600,000 bushels. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an exciting story that we have to tell. The best management practices that we, as Virginians, have invested into our farmers to fence their cows out of the stream, they're not all on board, okay? But they're slowly coming along, and the farmers are embracing, that whole issue. And we're seeing the results. The crabs are very, very healthy. The clam aquaculture, that's business people. We're farming cows and chickens here. They're doing it with seafood over in the bay. That's exciting. It's bringing a lot of new revenue into the state coffers. The seagrasses are coming back. I just heard, kind of on that line, I just heard a report today or yesterday about the air quality, how much the air quality's improved due to our efforts. But on the Chesapeake Bay, it's a great story. It's working. I'll vow to you, as I remain the chair, about everything water comes through the Chesapeake Bay, stormwater, wastewater, and I've been a staunch supporter. I've helped to kill measures that have tried to wind some of that stuff back. I'm absolutely committed to the health of the Chesapeake Bay.
So I'm sorry to interrupt, but is there something specific that you would want to see done additionally to protect the Chesapeake Bay?
Well, to continue funding best management practices. Okay. That's a thing. I know there was talk at the federal level about defunding that, but ladies and gentlemen, we have adequate funds currently to continue our efforts in the best management practices. So.
Okay, so to continue funding. And then Mr. Finnegan, something specific that you'd like to see the state do to protect and improve water quality in the Chesapeake Bay?
Well, I would just say I'm glad that the Chesapeake Bay is doing better, and that is in part to federal regulations to try and improve that. There are lots of things put in place to protect that, and the water does flow through the Shenandoah Valley. I'm most focused on the water from the Shenandoah Valley right now. There are people that are getting sick from inner tubing down the Shenandoah River, and we need to make sure that we're protecting our water here. And one of the things that I would like to see as a policy change in the state of Virginia is to do what Augusta County and the state of Maryland has done, which is to ban the practice of hydrofracking and hydraulic fracturing in the state of Virginia. It's something we can do. It's something our neighboring state has done, and it's something that Augusta County has done also. It's not a safe enough practice. It's not something that we can do with full certainty that it won't get down into the karst topography of the Shenandoah Valley, and we need to protect our water above all other resources.
Real briefly, yes or no question, Mr. Wilt. Would you also support a ban on hydrofracking?
No, I wouldn't.
Okay. All right. On the issue of veterans, what is a specific piece of legislation you would like to see to help our veterans? Mr. Finnegan, you first.
I think we need to respect the sacrifices that veterans have made. We really need to make sure that they have full access to the medical care that they need, including mental health care for those suffering with PTSD. And one of the things I would like to see is stronger protections, particularly for military families and veterans from predatory lending practices. This is something that Loan Max and some other companies are preying on the military communities in Virginia, and that's something that I think is a shady practice, and the predatory lenders, the payday lenders, and we need to regulate those and make sure they're not preying on our veterans, and also making sure that our veterans have access to the mental health services they need at the time that they need them.
Mr. Wilt, specific to help veterans.
Yes, and I'm very proud of the work that the General Assembly's done recently in supporting our veterans. We are a very veteran-friendly state. I think we have about 800,000 veterans in the state of Virginia. And what's depressing is to see their treatment at the federal level, the Veterans Administration, how that is harming oftentimes our veterans. So the efforts that we've done here, we've committed to opening 2 hospitals for veterans, and I think maybe there was a groundbreaking on one recently, or it's coming up. And so to me, that's exciting. On the veteran front, I'm proud to, a couple of years ago, I carried a piece of legislation. It was brought to me by a young lady attending James Madison University. Her husband was killed in action. And so what I did, I afforded someone in that situation or their children to receive in-state tuition because she had just moved here. Okay, and so she didn't have time to wait and so forth. And honestly, I think at the time she brought it, she was a junior till we actually got passed. It wouldn't have done her any good, but she was looking forward to others, that would come after her. So it was a small measure, but it was again something to honor our veterans.
Okay, I've got a yes or no question here. Should the state provide employment protections, such as a statewide fairness ordinance, to protect LGBT individuals? Mr. Wilt, you first. Yes or no?
Could you repeat the question?
Should the state provide employment protections, such as a statewide fairness ordinance, to protect LGBT individuals?
I guess so. I've never thought about that. I guess you're talking, some of the other protections, that we have. So, if there's issues there.
Yeah, the other protection, race, gender, sexual orientation. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't. We already do it for gender, so I don't see that there would be harm. Now, but I will clarify on all those. As a business owner, I'm somewhat leery about some of those things because I don't want to see them used against the business. If a business owner has to address the poor quality of work from an employee, I don't want something like that to be used against them. Well, you're against me because I'm gay or whatever. Like, no, I'm against you because you're a lousy worker. Okay. So, but to go against someone, to attack someone because they're gay or lesbian or anything, I'm absolutely against that.
Okay, Mr. Finnegan?
The question was, would I support?
Would you support? Yeah, and should the state do that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you for your audience questions. We're going to wrap it up. In lieu of a closing statement, our journalists have 2 questions to kind of bring this to a close.
Mr. Finnegan, we'll start with you. Do you have a question for Mr. Wilt, your opponent?
I would like to know how your legislation, you talk often about, getting government out of the lives of private citizens. And I would like to know how, when I read your policy on abortion, you talk about she, her, she, her. Well, the women didn't get themselves pregnant. And I want to know, how are you going to equally apply the laws and the restrictions and the limitations that you have voted for women, also for men, and how are you going to make that equitable for both genders, given that men are often the ones pushing the women to have the abortion in the first place?
That's a tough question. Just, do you mind somewhat repeating it?
Yes, the legislation that you co-sponsored, the transvaginal ultrasound bill, that is aimed at women. Women have to go in and get that procedure. What would you do to make it more equitable so that a man has to do the same, has to abide by the same kind of regulation that a woman has to abide by, so that it's actually, equitable to both genders?
I completely do not understand how. I mean, the woman's pregnant.
How did she get pregnant?
Yeah.
Hold the applause, please. We're almost done.
But to require a man to get an ultrasound, I think that's a completely.
Do you have anything else to elaborate on this?
I'm stunned.
Okay.
Mr. Wilt, do you have a question for Mr. Finnegan?
Well, maybe a question or a comment. I mean, through the night, I mean, in what I've seen as far as your platform, there seems to be a marked difference between you and I as far as, our vision for the state and for how to grow the economy. I get a sense from your positions that you tend to take more of a government control position and limiting freedom. Business and anybody that makes money or has money tends to be the bad guy, the evil rich. And so, how do you intend to, and you talk about growing the economy, but how do you do that while you also, in the same token, seem to be demonizing success?
I don't demonize success. I strive for success myself. And when I talk about equality and making sure that everyone's on equal footing, what working families don't have much of in General Assembly is lobbyists working on their behalf for policies that will make their lives better. And that is what I'm talking about. We don't have a level playing field here. There aren't people going to General Assembly and saying, "Hey, I'm making minimum wage and I can't afford a college education." Who's lobbying for them? And so what I want to see is a state policy that protects the common good and aims toward the common good. And when you talk about regulation, I mean, I'm for deregulating things like when it comes to decriminalizing marijuana, and also when it comes to not trying to overregulate women's choices and women's health. So I mean, I really feel like I do stand for liberty, particularly where it comes to issues of personal control over your life.
Okay, and the last question, Emma, it's all yours.
Mr. Wilt, this is for you first. You're both from the same town, and as you mentioned, you went to the same church. What is one thing you admire about Mr. Finnegan?
No, it's not tough. Back a week or so ago, Broadway Timberville Fall Festival. That was the second one. We ran into. No, I didn't see you at the first one. Nonetheless, but I was at the first one, or at the second one. I'm sorry. Actually, I was at both. I'm still getting rattled. At the second one I attended, I ran into Mr. Finnegan's mom and dad. I see them out in the audience. There they are. And I made a comment to them that I appreciate your efforts, the job that you're doing. If I can be so bold as to hopefully not divulge any secrets, but Mr. Finnegan contacted me early in this race and said that he was going to run an honorable race. He wasn't going to attack me personally, and he's been a man of his word. And so we can go to. That's the important thing of foreign. We do this in our own caucus in the Virginia General Assembly. We don't always agree with one another, but we go toe to toe on the issues, and that's where hopefully we can come to solutions. To me, that's the advantage that we have over our federal government, is that in Virginia we come together to find solutions to problems doesn't always go the way that you might wish or I might wish, but we find solutions. But back on Mr. Finnegan, he was a man of his word. He's come after me on the issues, and that's what these types of events are all about. So I appreciate you being a man of your word. Thank you.
And Mr. Finnegan, in turn, what is one thing you admire about Mr. Wilt?
Well, as you said, we went to church together growing up, and know your family for a long time, and I appreciate the cordial friendliness and the way that you conduct yourself. When I talked with your wife Vicki, checking out cars at JMU, and your family has done a lot for the community in Broadway, and making sure that people feel listened to, and I appreciate your friendly demeanor, and making sure that this didn't get ugly, and you've been a man of your word as well in terms of not going ugly. And we've seen a lot of nasty stuff out there this election cycle on the gubernatorial level, so I do appreciate that from you as well.
So, on that happy, respectful note, we're going to end this forum. Let's give our candidates a round of applause for a wonderful forum. And a round of applause for our journalists asking the questions. Thank you all, and have a great night.